Hello everybody, Dr. Schenker, leading for deeper learning. I get to spend the morning here at the Tarrytown School District talking with Dr. Sanchez, who's the 2025 NYSOSS Superintendent of the Year. I am looking forward to having this conversation as we have talked about this season, providing reflections and then having conversations with superintendents as they're thinking about what do these transformations mean for my school as we think about New York Inspires, as we think about the changes in New York, as we think about what matters most, our students. Can't wait to be with you soon. Good morning, everybody. Dr. Jonah Schenker. We are here with Leading for Deeper Learning. I am super excited to be down here south in Tarrytown with the Dr. Sanchez here. An amazing opportunity as we have talked about this year's episode, thinking about massive transformations that are happening here in New York. And although last year we had an opportunity to have amazing conversations across different leaders from some of our folks at the state education department to some of our local leaders and beyond, really this year zeroing in on what these transformations mean as I have an opportunity to kind of think through them, think about the process and what it's going to take to lead these transformations. And then in between those sessions where I get to process getting to connect with leaders like yourself who are having to actualize this work. And we had some conversations as we were sitting down about the path forward and really being able to articulate those out, and we'll get to that. But first, really just want to start with introductions. Dr. Sanchez, tell us a little bit about this moment in leadership and some of the things that have brought you to this moment in your current role or leading up to this role. So,
all right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's exciting to be in this room and have this opportunity to talk about education and leadership and what's going on, across New York. You asked what about this moment? I think there's always a moment, right? And I think we just have to take advantage of it as leaders. In a variety of ways, and not necessarily look back and live with regret. As a leader, having had opportunities both as building level and now as a superintendent, my hope and what I see now is how do we make sure that all kids have access to high level opportunities. I use this term that a colleague had shared with me, there are some that are distant and that some have greater proximity. And I think we have an opportunity to make sure that all kids have proximity to high interest opportunities, high level of quality courses and lived experiences that we can create within the context of our school systems, working with our community, staff, and others. For me, my journey's been, just that. I've had opportunities across the board where I've seen and experienced various mentors that have seen something in me that, like education, and well, in some ways it is and isn't, wasn't so linear. Folks saw, promise, I guess, gave me opportunities to fall forward. And as a result of that, I've learned, grown, and now I have the opportunity to serve as a superintendent, in this case, in the public schools of the Tarrytowns.
Awesome. And tell me a little bit about Tarrytown. How many schools, population?
Yeah, so we have about 2,600 students. We're about 30 miles north of New York City. We're the home of the Headless Horseman. So if you look at our mascot, yes, it's a gentleman on a horse with no head. Greeting our kids. We have about 6 schools currently. Not about, we do have 6 schools. We have also what's called the Princeton Plan, where irrespective of where you live in the 10591 zip code, if you're at a specific grade level, you go to that school. So we have a pre-K building, a first grade building and a second grade building. I can explain a little bit of that. A 3, 4, 5 building, a middle school connected to our high school as well. Why I say these singleton grades is that we're also in the midst of a pretty large bond project. So we're using a building that we originally had BOCES in, and we're using it as swing space, and eventually become of our sort of our ecosystem.
Very cool.
So, we're not large in terms of square miles, but we're also a very diverse district. About more than 50%, close to 60% of our students are Latino. Mostly the rest are white Caucasian, and then about 3% of our students are Black. And then socioeconomically, there's differences in our community as well. We have about 50% of our students are low SES, and I think one of our strengths is our diversity, but it's also one of our unique challenges as well.
Yeah.
But overall, it's a very supportive community. I would say it's really challenging on living here in the midst of October because it's the hub of Halloween. But aside from that, there's a lot of beauty happening in our schools.
Right. Awesome. And I want to go back to something that that you talked about, which is there's always a moment. And there is always a moment. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 moments at once. To me, this moment, and slide aside education and not even moving into politics, but we have a complex world right now. How, as a leader, as the world grapples with really difficult things, that as I talk to people, as I experience in my own system, aren't just impacting students, right? Adults are carrying a lot, students are carrying a lot. What does that mean for you as you think about the well-being, the humans that are in your care, as we navigate this moment? And then there's the moment of New York Inspires and the transformations, which we'll get to, but just kind of want to check in on how are you doing as a leader in these moments, and the superintendent charged with the care of the 2,000 plus students and staff. How do you do that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's like an essential question, and one that's not unique to, yes, you're right, there's a lot going on in our world, and a lot happening here within the context of our own community. Mm-hmm. On a personal level, this is about, finding, colleagues that help lift me up, and that happens among colleagues here in Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow. But also colleagues within the region. What I would say is, from like an SEL perspective, is probably in the beginning of my career, I thought I had to take it on all and or do it all, and that maybe asking was call it like a sign of weakness, but it really wasn't. And I've done more of that to really reach out and ask, and that helps to elevate sort of the pressure that I might be under. As it relates to change or things that I might be dealing with. I have a great team that I work with. I lean on them and hopefully give them the space to do the work. And because of the good work they're doing, that helps lessen some of the stress. And also, I have a very supportive board that's been helpful in understanding both the personal side of my work, or like the personal well-being, as well as the goals that we set for each other. As a leader, I think, irrespective of the times, you lead with a sense of empathy, always, right? Like trying to really understand the individuals within your system, trying to understand what they might be going through, being empathetic to what that entails, the challenges that they might be facing, both personally and professionally, and trying to create the conditions where, there's space for them to, for lack of a word, just breathe, and honoring their voices, and that is really important. We have a goal here. We have 3 pillars, but one centers around the well-being and belonging, and that's inclusive of our staff and our students. And so that's one of our main drivers, and we try to measure that. We try to check in on that, and that's really important for us as we drive academic excellence, that we're also considering it's not an and, it's or an or, it's and.
Right.
And we know that if everyone's in a good place that and feels a sense of belonging, that also has a positive impact on student achievement.
Yeah. And so kind of two things, again, that you touched on that I want to kind of probe at a little bit. This first idea about, in these moments and the self-care and this idea of colleagues. That is the heart at the why in which this work has been created. I believe that as we think about change and our system, that it is no longer acceptable to do this work in isolation, that we have a responsibility to lead in coalition and co-design. While we have 700 plus districts, we have the Big Five, we have independent schools. As we think about the changes inherent in New York Inspires and these 4 transformations, as I've said many times, this is not new. The things that we've been talking about, many of the leaders in New York have been trying to actualize the movement out of some of the industrial model or foundations of education, which aren't about awe and empathy and voice, right? Like systematically, they're not designed that way. And so I think there's a unique opportunity in instability or when the world is volatile. The path through is together and through potentially new creation. And as we move into those transformations, I don't think it's about needing to erase what we're doing and create all new. You mentioned this pillar. You have 3 pillars. What are the 3 pillars that stand as foundation here in Tarrytown?
So one is this sense of well-being and belonging. The other one centers around community engagement, family and community engagement. And the last one is innovative learning.
Okay.
So those are 3 major foci for us as a school district. And then we have clear actions centered on each of those 3.
Right. And so as we think about pillars and vision statements and mission statements, I think often I'll have a conversation with a leader, building leader, who talks about the aspirations that are inherent in a mission statement that are well crafted. They want students who are going to be globally connected and understand civic readiness, contribute to communities. And then we start to kind of peel back and say, well, let's take a look at the actions or kind of the meat under, that's gonna drive that. And it often are not the systems and structures to get at that. And so I know you also have a portrait of a learner here. Can you share a little bit about the things that you're doing here in Tarrytown that you think are about creating those conditions, creative innovators, connecting people as humans outside of New York Inspires and the path forward? The things that you're talking about are inherent in the portrait of a graduate. They're inherent in the CRS framework, which is centered there. Some ideas about how you've redefined learning, and you're thinking about, because you started off by saying all students need opportunities. Not all students need just academics, or all students need
Correct.
this. So a little bit about kind of the approach here and what you have been cultivating, and then we'll dive a little bit into what's coming next.
So I appreciate that. And keep in mind, this is entering my 3rd year here completing my 3rd year here in Tarrytown. So there's still a lot of work to do.
Right.
But I do want to elevate the one piece that you mentioned, which is the importance of systems, right? Like we, as leaders, we create structures and systems to help support our pathway to a vision. And that some of the work, it doesn't become just a one-time event. We often hear from staff, universally, we did this one PD, but what's the connection to the work? And that's some of the mindful efforts that we're putting forth here. and the team is putting forth is really trying to be really thoughtful in the structures and systems we're putting in place in support of our district pillars in this case. Some of the ways in which we're doing that in terms of like belonging, innovative learning, family engagement, center number one on elevating student voice. That's really, really important as we think about, hearing from our students, and, we frame the word empathy, like we need to hear their stories and understand what we're doing and how the system, where we can maybe even dismantle some of the barriers that they've seen and experienced. To give you a sense, we interviewed all our 3rd through 5th grade students in focus groups. We did the same in our entire middle school, and we have plans to do that at our high school. That's just one example where we're really trying to like listen deeply, and then in turn creating some plans around what that is. I think sometimes we're guilty of like surveying, and then the survey is done, we have these results, but then don't choose to take action with that. And so we're being truly mindful of saying, okay, we're doing this, and now let's take some direct actions associated with it. And it's starting to shift some of the work that we're doing in like academically. We have, we're in the midst of looking and redefining our middle school schedule, having conversation of what that might look like at our high school. Our high school team has done a really great job of just using English, of creating like selectives where there's even greater choice for our students that otherwise weren't necessarily there at the time. And that comes from their voice, and elevating that and really trying to dismantle some of the things that we know have been barriers for our students, and making sure, again, that the system responds to all students.
Yeah. And, I think it's important because you brought up, again, this idea of empathy work and surveys. And I'm not opposed to surveys, but empathy work is different than surveying, right? Like creating the conditions to have dialogue with students, and actually thinking about, I think about this kind of arc of student voice, where gathering student voice is critical, but that's at the kind of beginning of the arc. And how do we move so that students are actually the decision makers, or have a role in decision making for their own pathway, and to inform the system. What, these conversations, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, what did you hear? What are students saying in Tarrytown?
Yeah, so we've heard generally like what are some of the stressors that we create,
right.
And some of them, there's things that we maybe weren't even as conscious about, right? But they're letting us know that some of the conditions and some of the examples, they're like, I'm missing out on some of the specifics on it. But it was really helpful because some of them were just modest pivots for us.
Right.
They were like low-hanging fruit that we can seek to change instantaneously for our kids. But I would say too, on the positive side, they use this term like glows and grows. Like they gave us areas where we need to grow, and then some of the glows is like they really highlighted some things that they found. Like from an SEL perspective, a sense of connection, were really valuable to them. And It's some of the things that, as we speak to like New York Inspires, it's when they had authentic opportunities to do work, like some of the project-based opportunities that have been provided by staff. They want more of that.
Yeah.
Like they really saw, that number one, the work was manageable and it was meaningful to them. And so like the question becomes for us is like, okay, so how do we leverage some of that? How do we use that to bring about some positive changes? If, number one, there's a direction to that, and that's what we're trying to do, but also our kids are saying that's what they want. So, that's the work that we're bringing to committees. That's the work that building leaders are talking about within the context of their buildings. Just this past, maybe about 3 weeks ago at our superintendent's conference day, we spent a great deal of time unpacking their voice, meaning some of the information we had to say, okay, what's 1 or 2 manageable steps that we can take as a system in the now, and then we can come back to see where we are and continue to make progress going forward.
Yeah, and I love, you mentioned, middle school and high school kind of schedules, and I have been, and I've been adamant about, again, the master schedule as a key driver, as a value statement, that that if whether it's SEL, whether it's restorative practice, whether it's community, whether it's instructional shifts, if that is what you are leaning into and wanting, and we take a look at a master schedule that's 5 days by 8 periods of siloed academics, you're not going to get those things, right? Like It's not designed for that. And as we think about, I think what you kind of surfaced up as some of the glows and grows from students, deeper learning or leading for deeper learning, because I believe that the conditions for learning for students are no different than what adult learners need as well. Yeah. And it turns out that as we think about this as a concept, and not everybody uses that language, but when we talk about when students are really connected to their learning or having these deeper learning moments, there's a couple things that are true. One, they can see their identity in the work, or their identity matters. That creativity is a driver, and they're working towards mastery, not necessarily just compliance on a numeric-based assessment. And I'm not advocating that assessments have to go, numbered, or grading has to go away. I mean, personally, I believe that is one of the sacred cows of education, that the numeric grading is designed to rank and sort and order kids, but it's not really about that kind of learning experience. And so as we move into chat a little bit about the changes here, and as you think about kind of the systems and what you're building here, what do you hope for, or what must be true for every student in Tarrytown? If we were to go, you build your pathways and your maps through these changes, the conditions allow for you and team and staff, students and community to kind of actualize this. What does that look like at the end for a graduate here in Tarrytown? What must be true for you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as you're talking about this, the word excellence is always going to be thriving, right? So we want excellence for all kids.
Right.
What that looks like could vary, to your point.
Right.
What I hope we can create is, a system that is continuously adaptive based on the needs and interests of our kids, right? That it's not a linear pathway. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about when we think about New York Inspires. I think that's the opportunity that is before us, is to really begin thinking in that direction. Not that we haven't thought, but there's a broader message that's being sent to us to say, we want you to think in this direction, right? And now you are sort of like permission to do it.
Right.
So, it's for us, it's really kind of revisiting everything that we do through this lens, and saying, okay, is it aligned with sort of the dispositions that we want for our portrait of a learner? And we've moved away from a portrait of a graduate to a portrait of a learner, thinking about discreetly, how does that look like in each of our grades from pre-K through grade 12 onto graduating, that I hope we can foster some of those skills or dispositions in our students, from being critical thinkers, civic mindedness, much of what the state is noting as well. And then that, as we think about the pathway for our students, that we have a robust set of offerings in a variety of ways that, may not necessarily even be in the physical plant of our schools.
Right.
That lead to, fostering the type of, dispositions that we want, but also prepare our students for not necessarily always college, but it could be career as well, and ultimately for life. But I think, and I go back to this term of flexibility, our system needs to be adaptive.
Yeah.
And we need to kind of look at it through that lens every year, every day, because children, interests and needs continue to evolve. And I always say, kids don't need to fit our system. We need to adapt our system around our kids. Yeah. And that's the work. Yeah. And that's what I hope we can create or continue to foster in the public schools of the Tarrytowns. And I think, to your point, you noted before of I hope also that what we are doing could be something that we can share with others. And similarly, that we can learn from our colleagues. Right. I have a friend that uses the term, he got it from a mentor, it's called SWIPE. It's you steal with integrity, pride, and enthusiasm. So we're going to share, take some of these ideas, but, I'll give credit to where I found it, obviously. But ultimately it's about kids. Yeah. And it doesn't matter where you are in the state of New York, but I hope, if it helps any system and others have done it for us, then that's what we want to do. Yeah.
And, and so as we kind of think about adaptability, and that idea of like, how do we create a school system which each year takes a look back at the things that we've done. We spend a lot of money, builds in the appropriate amount of time for kind of reflection to say, like, did the things that we did this past year work? Did it create improved conditions or help students move towards excellence in this kind of new expanded way? And I think, structurally, our schools often just carry forward with inertia, and we don't have that the system that is a learning system, and so to be able to do that kind of internally, have the prongs out that are connecting people, is going to be critical as we think about New York Inspires, which is upon us, and for transformations inherent. We've got the portrait of a graduate with the CRS framework at the center for transformation one. We've got this idea of redefining learning experiences and credits, thinking about like what is going to be the unit of measurement for all of the things. We've got the decoupling of Regents assessments from graduation requirements, right? May still stand, some still have to be given, but again, they won't be a criteria to exit. And then ultimately moving towards one transcript, one diploma here in New York. So as you think about those transformations, we've got a rough timeline between now and 2029. You have been on this journey thinking about the work here. What excites you most? Where do you think in those transformations we have the largest opportunity to shift the learning experiences to what you think, again, pushes on promoting excellence and opportunity for all students? How are you thinking about these transformations? What are you hearing from your leadership team and staff? Are people excited about it? I know there's a lot in there, but just, as you think about these four, where are you sitting right now in the context of? I
mean, I was simply going to answer, all of it excites me, right? And then, the answer there. But I think there's real opportunities in everything that, that New York Inspires has outlined, from the porch of a graduate to, the graduation diploma. All of it is, I see it as like, what excites me is that I see the opportunity for our kids, number one. But also I see it as an opportunity for us to come together as a learning community, as a school district, and say, okay, now let's think about, it gives us a chance to really align our values to what we're being asked to consider. And I think that helps culture. And I'm excited about what that opportunity might be, meaning like we can work as a team around this. It's not a prescriptive, like, here, apply this, but there's there's great flexibility in sort of reaching the vision. And so the other part that excites me is just my personal beliefs in a lot of this work. I think the opportunity to redefine credits is exciting. I think there's been exciting work in New York State and across this country that we should really begin to think about. And some question whether we're lowering standards. I don't see it that way. I think it's, but we need to, individuals that maybe have more of a fixed mindset, we have to work with them to say, here's a better way or a different way for our kids to learn that is, that values them as learners personally.
Yeah.
And so I see, what excites me again is this opportunity to come together. The opportunity to redefine some of the things that we've been talking about. Carnegie units have been in existence for however long. A few gentlemen went into a room, they came out and said, this is what we're going to define. And we've questioned it, but we haven't really taken the next steps.
Right.
And I think this is that time. And I think with all that, I hope what we can create here as we're going about this is this element of, psychological safety where folks can come together and share different ideas and push the system, ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing. The other opportunity is to, it's a real chance to transform the work. And I hope we can, I'm optimistic that, as we start, we've taken some steps, but as we take more steps, that this is going to be a promising opportunity for us as a school district here in the state of New York.
So I want to go to the Carnegie unit for a second, but before we do, your teachers, staff, community, and I always give the disclaimer, let's say teachers, but anyone who touches the life of a child as they journey through K-12, one-to-one aides and social workers, but we won't list them all. What's their readiness? What's their hesitation? How are you? Because we're in an interesting moment in time where we've got this bold vision, we've got some timelines, and the field is asking for some things. So I think there's a general acknowledgement that some things have to shift. But we don't have revised standards. We don't know what the 22 credits and the 5 Regents exams are going to look like. So how are you cultivating or building the readiness? Because the stuff will come. Right. It will move. Are you feeling like teachers and staff and communities are excited by this or ready for this?
I mean, I think you have folks across the whole continuum, to be honest. I think there are some that still hold on to, we need what we've had, and some of it is based on personal experiences that they went through as students. And this sense, too, that if we don't maintain this same process that we've always had, it's going to jeopardize students as they move into potentially college or career. And then there are others in sort of the continuum that are more ready. They're like, sort of this sense of like, finally, I get to really explore this in a way, or I have some ideas that can, that could be better for the system and better in my classroom that, I've been, sort of stuck with Regents exams and other, challenges that they've been facing, right? So, but I think the more we have these, ongoing conversations about it, the more it alleviates some of the concerns that folks may have, and at the same time excites those that are already excited. Yeah. And so, that's the part that we're sort of in that phase of, is continuing to have dialogue around it, making connections, even, as we look at our porch of a learner, making those connections to say, listen, we're doing some of this stuff already. This isn't, there are some things that it's not changing the whole system, but there are some components that are going to remain the same, and there are others that we're going to change. And let's talk about both along the way. And that seems to, lessen some of the apprehension or fear that folks may have. Right.
And I think that is, what I'm hopeful and have been encouraging folks is that we have this period of time right now where, the tangible and tactical pieces may not be in place. But there is so much work to do, and it's just human work. It's conversations, it's the empathy work with the adults. It's that work with the students. And over this last 2 weeks, I've had the opportunity to have some really, really fascinating conversations with Tim Knowles, who's the CEO of Carnegie. And Carnegie is leading the largest kind of conversation on moving away from the Carnegie unit. So it's probably time that we take a look at that unit of measurement here. And he said a couple things to me last week, which are things that I've known and have heard in other conversations. But he talked about the invisible consensus of the critical skills that are needed for both college and or career and workforce. And those are the skills that are inherent in our portrait. And those are the conversations when we ask, regardless of who the audience is or what the geography is. So industry folks or community-based organizations or higher ed, like what are the skills that we ought to be preparing students to be ready for whatever next is, 2-year, 4-year, military, travel, directly into the workforce, whatever it is. Those words that are inherent in the New York State Portrait of a Grad, maybe the language changes a little bit, but that's that invisible consensus. And he started to talk about that in relation to the currency of the diploma. Like, what does it signify, or does it signify to college institutions that these students are ready for this body of work? Or for somebody going directly in the workforce, does a New York State diploma as it currently exists mean to that employer that that student is ready to come work? And the answer, if you look at the data, is no. And so we've got an obligation, I think, to not just try to do the same things expecting different outcomes. And we've got that opportunity. So like, what does it look like in, are we gonna have 22 credits? Are we gonna have less credits? Are we moving to competency-based? I mean, time will tell the direction that it moves. But I think the other piece is that I've had an opportunity, again, to talk to students and teachers all around this country whose focus is not just pure academic knowledge, where they've really built schools and systems that are fostering leadership and self-direction, creativity, civic readiness. And to the question of like, are we gonna lower the standards? The answer is no. It's a clear no, that like when students are engaging in thoughtful, meaningful projects where like the deeper learning principles are happening, they see themselves in the work, the creativity and mastery are at the core, they're operating at a different level. And yes, academics as well. But I think it's through that gatekeeper of kind of passion and purpose for students where we begin to move them along. And so as we think about the changes, there's kind of 3 questions that I have been centering for Ulster BOCES as we think about this, and in the conversations with our districts as we think about a community of practice kind of embracing this work. Local context matters. There isn't one path forward. And we are entering and always engaged in design work. Like every decision that we make as leaders, teachers, we're designing an experience or something for somebody else. So as we think about these 4 transformations, what are we already doing that leans into this that we want to bring forward? Maybe to your point, we have to grow it horizontally and vertically because it's like a pocket of excellence. But like, what do we want to bring forward? The second question, which you talked about, a modest pivot. I think you used that language. What do we just need to stop doing? There are some things that no longer serve us that we can kind of let atrophy or fall off. And where are there opportunities to design new within this context? So as you think about like where the Tarrytowns are right now, where you're going, and the kind of 4 dimensions of these of New York Inspires, or 4 transformations, what are you bringing forward that like leans into this? What are some of the practices that you think we need to kind of let go, no longer serve us, and opportunities to design new, and any of those that you want to touch?
I mean, I'll just start off like we've had some conversations at our high school in the current stage. Like to your point, like we know that the regents are they'll still be there, but not necessarily the same number, and at the same time, there's a different look at their and value associated with them. We give a lot of regents in the current state. And we started to have conversations around, okay, so what's the opportunity now to maybe redefine some of those courses aligned with some of the things that we talked about, this sense of authenticity, there are more meaningful opportunities that we can create for our students in learning environments, or redefining the curriculum associated with that it's not even adding staff. It's just taking a course that was originally, a certain way with a, certain end result, in this case, a formal assessment, i.e. a Regents exam, and pivoting in a different way and giving our staff some voice associated with that as well. And that's exciting. And to me, it's, I use this term, an organized abandonment, meaning that we've had something, it's not necessarily getting us the results we are. It's not about adding something else. I'm going to give to get something else. And so we're going to give up, perhaps a physics Regents to offer something else in the area of physics, or maybe something, that's not, that's the principles of physics, but through a different lens that might be more exciting, more, as we think about the dispositions and the portrait of a graduate / portrait of a learner. Those are, we want to make sure that we're mindful of that. So, that's the permission that I hope to offer our staff, is we've done it a certain way for a certain period of time, or maybe a long period of time. The state's telling us that, we can move in a different direction. I'm philosophically aligned with this and give us permission to do it. Now, what do we need to do to make it happen?
Yeah.
And it goes back to, is like when we've mentioned it a few times, is like, okay, so let's look at what's happening across the state. What are the opportunities here? Don't try to do it in a silo, but let's look and let's share some of the course guides. What are the other learning opportunities that we may want to consider here, and I'll connect you. And that in itself is great professional learning that could take place. So those are the conditions, but at the same time, on the formal side is how do we redefine some of the learning experiences that we've been given based on what New York Inspires is sort of driving us to.
Yeah, and again, I think as I often share, all 4 transformations, I think, are important steps. I think the change that we're talking about, that we aspire for students, is inherent in transformation 1 and 2. This portrait of a graduate and redefining learning experiences. I think that's where the magic lies. The Regents, in my opinion, they're low-lying fruit. And I often share, I've counted up, I've been on 23 interviews in my life. And I'll say, with a disclaimer, because I do love this subject, I really do, but nobody's ever asked me what I got on my earth science Regents in a job interview. And that particular teacher in 9th grade, earth science, embraced all of these other things. So it really was a magical moment. There's another kind of, as you were talking about, the kind of depth of the learning experience. We use kind of locally for us, one of my favorite kind of constructs comes from Ron Berger's work from EL Education, and he talks about hierarchy of audience. Hierarchy of audience, when students are working for compliance or to fulfill a requirement for a teacher, like lowest form of engagement. And as you move up this pyramid, when students are working to be of service to community and world, authentic projects that actually have impact, highest level of engagement. And so that idea that you're talking about, right, we don't have to just throw away everything we did, but let's take a look at some of these courses, and how can we infuse in experiences that are gonna bring students to more of those authentic experiences or things they want to look at. And I think that's the right path forward. I will say, and I continue to say, 2 things that I think are critical for the state education department as they're thinking about schools and systems who want to do this work. And those are 2 kind of foundational drivers. 1, these 4 transformations can't be 4 separate initiatives. There's an interaction and an interplay between all of these. When we talk about assessment, when we talk about skills inherent in the portrait, when we talk about redefining learning, and ultimately what the formula for graduation credits, again, competencies, et cetera, and what will be illustrated on the diploma, there's an interplay between all of those. The most critical interplay, I believe, in this second piece is that this work can't all be additive. And I think there's a real opportunity for the state education department as we think about the reprioritization of standards that's inherent in this, to create some room for you all to do the work that you just talked about, which is if in English 11, there were 50 things that teachers are responsible that are driven by standards. Well, let's take a look at those. Are they all relevant? Can we go deeper in some of them? Can we pare those back? Maybe it's down to 30 priorities to allow some space so that you can now say, okay, now let's take a look. Because it isn't geared towards, the standards align to the assessments, and we kind of lost what happened in the middle,
right,
which is the experience for students. And so if we get some of that flexibility in terms of like what we're prioritizing, not necessarily for a Regents exam, but what's critical for all New York students to develop as they move through this hierarchy, it allows, I think, you that opportunity then to have those conversations about, okay, well, let's take some time and take a look at that. I want to go back to one thing that you shared with me before we sat down, because I know it is a critical step if we're gonna do these transitions right, and we're going to not have them just be kind of a checklist, but they're gonna move the system in the way that we need to move it. You talked a little bit about the pathway for Tarrytown, the roadmap. And I was sharing a little bit about, as we looked at this playbook here, trying to kind of offer, again, not any of the answers. It's a book with no answers in it, but it begins to carve out a potential path to lead this work. But you articulated a little bit more clearly and deeply of what needs to be true for your work as a systems leader if you're going to move an institution from where you're at to future state and everything that needs to happen in between. So you share that a little bit about kind of how you're thinking, because I grabbed on to you weren't focused on like all the things you have to do, but this map to help people understand where you're going.
Yeah. We started off by talking like these aren't like a 1 hour workshop that you're going to, right, and these discrete pieces that aren't interconnected, and expect everyone to go to the workshops and come back and turnkey the information. There's a place for some of those every once in a while, but I think what we talked about is, really sharing, a vision to get to the goal with the team. And understanding the various stages and how we're going to approach it in manageable chunks. And that part includes, yes, some concrete actions as it relates to maybe some direct changes that are taking place, but we're also entering those spaces and this path as in a learner stance, and taking the opportunity to hear, learn along the way until we lead to final recommendations for our system. To me, as I think about the manner in which the state has outlined it, they're not asking us, and rightfully so, and to their credit, they're not asking us to transform tomorrow. Now, there have been times where I've been asked to change things from one year to the next. But they truthfully understand that this is going to take a process and that there's some local voice that is extremely valuable. And like the book you referenced, which is exceptional. I just want to highlight out of that, at least just taking first glance of volume 1, it serves as a thinking point for us to reflect, which I've referenced before. Like we need this process to be a reflective practice or process where we're thinking about, what we're doing, why we're doing it, and continue to ask ourselves, is it aligned with our core values of what we want to see for our students as it relates to a portrait of a graduate? And certainly, elevating where I started with, which is like hearing from our kids in this process. So, I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do or will be trying to do over the course of, the upcoming years, is really create this pathway for the transformation to take place. We talk about learning pathways, but as a school system, we need to put ourselves in a pathway leading to, adapting to the changes that New York State is requiring.
Yeah, I love that, and especially where along this roadmap or pathway, you were explicit. There's some things that have to change, right? Like, right, here's where those are. Here's where there's opportunities to like co-design with your staff. And as you were talking, what I was thinking about is what you were describing is no different than what I aspire to happen in a classroom for a student.
Right.
Or like I envision a student at the beginning of the year, a teacher articulating this journey, describing where the flexibility is, where they can co-design the pieces together, being explicit about like, here's some things we got to do, and ensuring that journey was tied to like passion and purpose and value statements. And I think that's really the culminating piece, which is just like, that's what learning can and should be. And there's an opportunity here in these transformations, in this period of time, which I agree with you, allows us to have some conversations along the way. It isn't a tomorrow. It's still a rigorous timeline. There's some milestones. And so as we kind of wrap up here this morning, you're a superintendent in a public school in New York, excited about transformations, wanting to do this work, thinking about a pathway and a roadmap to get there. What do you need? What do you need from state education department? What do you need from teachers, community, BOCES, as you think about wanting to do this work the best you can for everybody, but most importantly for students?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm just going to reflect, if I could, just on one of your statements around the learning. We often talk about like just taking one program that many of us have, like our science research programs. You think about the conditions in those spaces is, students choose their own research path. It becomes like the principles are there for what they need to eventually achieve, but the manner and the sort of the subject within that is flexible for them. And you just see students thrive and they come out communicators, researchers, and others. Like that's the depth of what we can create in a variety of spaces, not just limited to the sciences. So I just wanted, like, as you were talking, I'm thinking of like, well, to me, it's like science research in some ways, right? So that being said, like what I need is some of it is continuing to do what we're doing, which is, clear articulation of the path, giving us resources that we can, intentionally use and turnkey with our staff, our students, and our families, because this is it's both a technical and adaptive change here we're talking about. So we really have to think about mindsets as well, or first order, second order changes. And so that would be, real helpful. The other part is, which again, we've talked a little bit about, is, creating those spaces, whether it's BOCES, whether it's a SED, wherever it might be, for us to come together and learn. And, yes, maybe a BOCES can facilitate, and I use the term facilitate intentionally, so that we can share ideas amongst each other. When we bring groups together, iron sharpens iron, right? We can get and refine some of the ideas, because some have maybe taken a step before others have taken that step, and we want to learn from them, both the successes and things that they may have changed. And that is, that doesn't happen in isolation. Is we need those spaces to come together as a group. And then aside from that, I think when we think about conditions, and this isn't monetary, is like we need permission to fall forward. Like there's innovation comes with some sense of risk. And it's got to be okay. Never at the expense of kids. But if we're going to really try to change things, we also have to try in general. And I think we need to hear that it's okay to do that, and that the conditions for school districts are set so that we could. Yeah. And then that trickles down into the classrooms, that trickles down into so many other spaces. I think those are like a few of, and more of your book, things like that we can utilize to be thought provoking and to think things in a different way. So I think we're on the right path. I think we all know we can't do it alone. We should think in that direction, and making sure that we think about it as a collective, not these discrete districts working in isolation, but how do we find connections like we trying to make with our learners?
That's awesome. And the very reason why I am out here having conversations, why I spend time connecting with systems across this country, not to become who they are, but there are places who have been at these things for 15 or 20 years that we ought to take a peek at and learn. And that's true, again, right here in New York. And so our work is centering on not necessarily like not all of the things that you need to do here in Tarrytown. I have my own visions and aspirations for what teaching and learning should look like, but really thinking about the architecture and ecosystem that will allow conversation, collaboration, co-authoring, co-design in an efficient way, so that I want you to get your roadmap for Tarrytown done so I can take it and then adapt it for what our system might need to do. So I appreciate you taking some time. I know you have a lot on your plate to be with us here at Leading for Deeper Learning. Again, a pleasure. Dr. Sanchez, thank you for everything you do on behalf of the students, not just here in Tarrytown, but in New York. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.